Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick. We're here to wrap up the post-draft coverage here with an interesting topic, the UDFA signings by the Baltimore Ravens here that came in on Sunday. We're going to look through these players. There is, in a lot of cases, very scanty information on that. But joining me to talk about it in some depth is Josh Reed. Josh, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Ken. Great to be back with you for the second night in a row.
There you go. We had a great discussion through the draft that went up today. A lot of people have listened to that already. Really appreciate you doing such a good job on that. And I thought we had a good back and forth. And this is going to be a little lighter, frankly. There's not the same depth of review of these guys. A lot of these guys come from smaller schools, more difficult to get tape, not a lot of even highlight reels on them. If they do come from a large school, it's a first principles project again to go back and look at those guys. And I do have some advanced metrics on most of them, meaning not just combine stuff, but also some of the performance metrics they had. And there's a few interesting ones as we go through that we'll talk about certainly. But Josh, you're the guest. Why don't you bring up a guy that you want to talk about, and we'll start with him.
I mean, it's the guy everyone's talking about, right? You know, the Keaton Mitchell, man. That's my guy. I was surprised he didn't get drafted. I figured, you know, if a guy like what's the guy's name? Kenny McIntosh should get picked up in the seventh round. You know, a guy like Keaton Mitchell ran out like 4.33 or something like that.
4.37, yeah.
Yeah, 4.37. I think he was definitely gonna get picked up. So he's a guy, ECU guy, and the former Pirate. You know, as a North Carolina grad myself. You know, I didn't go to ECU, but I went to some ECU games when I was in college at North Carolina at Pembroke. But yeah, he's just like real explosive guy. I mean, I think according to PFF, he led the nation in his 54 runs of 10 plus yards were most in the country. So just real explosive dude, can get to the corner, take off. And I'm really excited. I just feel like he has the best chance of all these UDFA guys to actually push for a roster spot to stick around.
Yeah, 7.2 yards per carry as a junior at ECU, 60 catches in his career for 7.8 yards per target, which is pretty good for a running back. Not too many running backs get up that high. And one thing that is a problem is he's a very small back, 5'8", 179, nothing for arms. So he does not really have any value as a pass blocker. You may know or may not that he's the son of Ravens legend Anthony Mitchell, who had the kick six in the 2000 AFC divisional game.
I learned that through you, my good sir. I saw you had posted about it, and I plugged in one of my articles. And so yeah, I even looked up his dad's stats. I think he would have played for the Ravens for like 3 years to start his career, and then they finished out with like the Titans or somebody.
Yeah, a little bit of a story behind that. First of all, Mitchell was a guy the Ravens got in, I think, 2000 as a UDFA. Played special teams.
Tuskegee, I think.
Sounds right. And he played on the team on special teams pretty much only the whole season. In fact, he might have had a snap or two, and I have to go back and look if he actually had any. But even though the Ravens played a bunch of 7 DB packages, Mitchell didn't get on the field. Then in the divisional game, there was an injury to Kim Herring. So they moved Corey Harris to strong safety to take Kim Herring's role. And Anthony Mitchell actually was on the field not only for the kick six, but he also was on the field for the Ray Lewis interception. And he's in the background on some of the pictures you often see from the end zone of Ray Lewis returning the football. So he's on the field for a couple of big plays in Ravens history. I've talked to him at an autograph show. This is a lot to go on for Keaton Mitchell. We'll just enter with this final thing that he actually was told by Rod Woodson not to pick up the ball. He asked him, should I pick up the ball when it goes in the end zone like that? On the first blocked field goal by Keith Washington in that game. Keith Washington blocked 2 kicks. Anthony Mitchell ran back into the end zone to pick up the first one, and he was thinking about running it out, and Woodson told him not to do it, and then they went to the sideline, and Woodson goes, no, it's a live ball, goes past the line of scrimmage, it's like a punt, and all that's true. Second time around, ball came right up in the air naturally to him, floated right to him, and there's a number of Ravens that are giving them the safe side, let it go kind of thing. He took the ball, and immediately those guys did a great job of transitioning into blocking, and lots of good blocks thrown on that play on Mitchell's return, and of course it was Some people would say it's still the most important play in Ravens history. I think it's kind of been eclipsed by the Mile High Miracle, but it was an enormous swing in win probability in that game, right on same kind of level as the Huntley fumble against Cincinnati in terms of completely turning around a playoff game.
Yeah. That was just as a former special teams player myself. That's the kicking protection team's worst nightmare is getting a kick blocked. You got nothing but
big
guys.
bigs. Yep,
You guys out there, and just like, you could have the most athletic big. He's probably still not going to catch that $175 DB who's running down with the convoy. So. Yeah, there was those plays like that. Like I said, often get overlooked. But with a franchise like this that doesn't have the best offensive track record, things like that get remembered more and more.
Yeah. It's it was definitely a very cool moment. It was my best day ever of football prior to the Mile High Miracle for sure. We went to the game. It was that play happened, and literally Maureen turned to me and goes, "Hey, Mitchell." I said, "Who's that?" kind of thing. And I wasn't as much of a student of the game as I am now. I certainly wasn't doing anything in terms of keeping score of what defenders were on the field. Did those games much later, but anyway, I thought that was just one of those things that was really cool. He went to Cincinnati, played with Marvin Lewis, and my understanding is Marvin really had him for special teams more there, and he didn't get on the field as much as a defensive back because Marvin didn't use as many DBs when he was there. But pretty cool situation with Anthony Mitchell getting his son drafted. I'm sure he's very proud. And let's talk a little bit more about Keaton.
Yeah, he's just a guy that I feel like, given the status of the Ravens running back situation, like the Ravens are set for 2023. But only 2023.
Yeah.
And you're gonna want a guy to get those carries in the preseason. Like that's when the UDFA running backs get the bulk of their carries. I don't even know if they're gonna have Justice Hill get a lot of run just because of how integral he is to their special teams unit in the regular season. And like just anybody who's like really under contract or like who they really value, I feel like it's gonna be a bubble wrap for most of the preseasons. They're not gonna roll the dice like they did in 2021. So he's a guy I feel like is gonna have opportunity to not just make the team, but show what he has for this team, potentially even other teams if the Ravens don't retain him, because he's going to get a lot of running in the preseason, and I feel like he's going to be a guy. I'm not saying he's going to be that Isaiah Likely of this preseason, but he's going to have ample opportunity to showcase his talents, and I'm excited for what he can do both on offense and as a potential returner in the kicking game.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll get some play there. The Ravens need a backup at that position. They've got a couple guys they can go to in terms of their wide receiver core or Mitchell. I think are both good choices. I don't think Mitchell will be the ideal guy for kick coverage, but maybe he's a guy they can trust in that role too. You need fast guys, obviously, on all special teams units.
If he can show he can be a good gunner. I mean, Justice Hill, people didn't really project him to be a good special teams guy. And that guy was turned into one of the better gunners in the league the past couple of years. So if you're fast and tenacious, you can get down there and if you can catch a guy before he gets some momentum, or like almost right when he first catches the ball, because it really depends on the kind of returner that you're going up against. If you have a returner who likes to try to reverse field and make people miss, that guy will stop his feet. But when you're going against one of those north and south guys who just got one cut and go, like running backs who are returners often are one cut and go. It's receivers who are returners, defensive backs who are returners. They're the guys that try to reverse field and make people miss and that kind of stuff. So depending on the kind of returner that you have, if you could get a guy to stop his feet, you could drop your feet and take him down, or at least slow him up to get the rest of the guys come down there and round him.
Yep. Let's go back to Keaton, the runner here, because he's the one guy that I had kind of a full scouting review of. The other guys, I have various bits and pieces, but not a lot. So Keaton, I want to talk about a little bit. One of the things I really liked about him as a runner, when I'm looking at all the running backs, and he was an honorable mention in my group there, is he's very patient behind the line of scrimmage despite his speed. And so he kind of reminds me, he's much smaller, of course, of Le'Veon Bell in that respect, of a guy who really patiently kind of waits for holes. I think that kind of patience could translate to good mesh point mechanics, because the Ravens want a nice long mesh for Lamar to work his magic there. And you got to be able to allow the ball to be pulled late, a la Mark Ingram. You got to be good at that. That'll be one of the big challenges in this rookie camp is his first year camp for him, is making sure that he learns to execute the mesh point the way that Lamar wants it done. If he does, there could be a good trust build up there, I think, pretty quickly. Unfortunately, he probably goes in and does that a lot with the second team quarterback with Tyler Huntley and doesn't get as much time to practice it with Lamar. But anyway, it's something that if he learns to do that well, he's got a very good chance, I would think, to make this team. And he's one of two guys with the best chance, I think, of the UDFAs to make it. A couple things about his college career. Context has been a big issue for him. He played at ECU, and he played well against Cincinnati, but in general, most of his other good results came against lesser teams. Now, you run for over 7 years of carry. I'm not sure we care too much about that, but he's got a lot of highlights against lesser teams certainly in there. Great stylistic fit for the Ravens in terms of being a speed guy who can threaten the line of scrimmage horizontally. That was a big thing that's been missing from Roman's offense the last couple of years, is really having that guy who would really threaten the edge out of sidecar. Keaton Mitchell is the perfect guy for those kind of runs. Natural kind of bouncer to the outside, and will do a lot of things to force the defense to stay honest on the outside, maybe overreact some, and open up some big holes in the middle for Lamar. So I like a lot of that about him, and I thought in a lot of ways he was one of the really good, potentially cheap options to be a good stylistic fit for what the Ravens try and do. So a lot of things to like about Keaton Mitchell, and very happy he's a Raven.
Hey, would you rather have had, like, say Kenny McIntosh didn't get drafted? Would you rather have Keaton Mitchell or Kenny McIntosh? I'm still in the Keaton camp.
I'll take certainly Keaton undrafted over McIntosh drafted. How about that?
That's kind of what I was alluding to. Would you rather have spent I'd rather than spend a 7th-round pick on Voorhees, on who's going to be a projected starter in a year, than trade back in for to get a Todd Monken guy for the sake of getting a Todd Monken guy.
Yeah, I would agree with that. McIntosh might have been 9th or something on my list of running backs. He was definitely on the list. Let me bring that up. Where did I have McIntosh? I want to give you an answer that actually is what I've got here. Okay, so
I remember I had him fairly high on.
Yeah, I had him 9th.
I think I had him a little bit higher than that because of the Monken familiarity.
Right. I had Mitchell at 14th. I thought he was probably worth a 6th-round pick by my judgment, and the Ravens obviously didn't have didn't use a 6 on him, so they good value. They certainly, if you get a guy like that, I kind of wonder how they allocated their money this year, and I don't have that, but I wonder if they gave him a third of the total bonus pool they had, because he seems to be the player most likely to make the team. Okay, I'll pick another player to talk about right now, and that's SMU offensive lineman Jalen Thomas. 6'5", 311, 32-inch arms, 495 on the 40. He's not terribly old for a lineman. He's 23, but believe me, there's a lot of 24-year-olds and even some 25-year-olds by opening day who are out there among the Ravens UDFA players. The interesting thing about him is he started, not just played, but started at all 5 offensive line positions in 2022. So
that was my note too.
Yeah, ascending pass blocker. The Ravens are going to love that versatility. They want to Pat McCary Mark II if they can possibly get him. He has the speed, I think, to pull and work in level 2, but that's actually been knocked about his game in some reports. So you see a lineman who runs a 4.95 40, and you figure he's probably a good enough athlete to move around. And Bozeman, it was a 5 and change 40, and he could still get out there and pull, had the good footwork mechanics to do it properly, even though that hadn't been his thing in college. So hopefully this is a case where whatever things have not worked with him pulling, Coach D will be able to straighten out. I don't doubt for a second that Coach D has had some review of what he's done at SMU, and I think he's probably the best chance of a UDFA offensive lineman to make the team. So maybe the second highest behind Keaton of all of them.
Yeah, anytime the Ravens see the guy who has that positional flexibility, a la Patrick McCary, that's the kind of guy that they're really going to covet. And like I said, if they don't find a way for him to get him on the roster, he's definitely going to be a prime practice squad candidate. Like that, and he's a guy. I don't know if you saw the highlight of him catching a pass or scoring a touchdown. But any guy that they trust to go out for a passing pattern, I know they're going to be able to turn into a good puller, because that means that guy can move in space. If you trust him to catch the ball and be involved in the offense in that fashion. So he's a guy, that real, like what I saw on from the tape that I saw, real active feet, like the good size, solid pass protector. I think I read that he didn't allow a sack his final season.
Yeah.
Good 4-year starter. Ravens love that kind of stuff. Experience, flexibility, and mobility. So that's the kind of guy that I think has a really good chance of sticking around.
I want to point out just how impressive that is, too, because SMU obviously had to have some offensive line issues in general that he was asked to move around as much as he was. So they probably had a lot of continuity issues. And I don't honestly know from game to game who they were missing, but they had to have continuity issues for him to do that. This wasn't some sort of Bert Campaneris or Cesar Tovar stunt. Both those guys played all 9 positions in a single major league game, but they did it for marketing purposes. They want to draw a big crowd for those games and for teams that weren't doing all that well. In this case, he didn't do it out of showmanship here. He did it because they needed him to. And the fact that he was such a good pass blocker with such crappy continuity situation is a really impressive thing. PFF graded him very highly on that. I don't have the exact number, but he improved each year with his pass blocking, which is also something nice and positive. So very happy to see the Ravens get a guy like that. Wouldn't be surprised if a fair amount of their pool went to him too.
Yeah, I think he his pro day ran like a sub 540 too.
Yeah,
so
495.
Yeah. So he's a guy to get out there and move. Now, because he did so much stuff at the specific school, do you know where I'm going with this? Would you say that he was the Brandon Stevens of their offensive line?
Yes, that's a very good point. And it's 2 different coordinators, and I think I can't really say that Brandon Stevens did it entirely out of need because they were switching him on a down-by-down basis. It wasn't like a game-by-game basis. He at least started games at different positions. So I think it's more likely it was need-based on the offensive line than it was for Brandon Williams in terms of they wanted a specific sort of matchup on a down-by-down basis or a specific type of usage on a down-by-down basis with him. So I tell you what, one of the really funky things was trying to follow Brandon Stevens' red sneakers around that football field if you're just watching normal TV tape on that. So anyway, your turn. Bring us to the next player.
Okay, another guy I like to given the lack of I wouldn't say depth, but like the Ravens only have I think Travis Jones, Michael Pierce.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're only defensive tackles under contract through through this season. So another guy who I like who might have a decent chance is how do you say his name? Kaim Caesar from Ohio.
I call him Kai. Kai Caesar.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yes, it's probably Kaim. Yeah, probably Kaim. Caesar from Ohio. So I couldn't find a whole bunch of tape on him, but just based on some of the reports that I read, and I think like the limited tape that I did find on him, and the fact that this is a guy who's an ascending player too. He recorded a career high 5.5 sacks last year in college. And the Ravens, like I said, they value the interior pressure and the guy who's showing that he's not just a good run stuffer because he had pretty good run stuffing tape out there too. But a guy who can still on the uptick as a pass rusher, I feel like they're gonna value too and has perhaps a decent chance of making this roster. I mean, it took Michael Pierce to the last preseason game to make the roster, so you never know.
Yeah. Well, defensive line is one of the places where the Ravens have really been able to find guys. My guess is some scout really liked this guy and maybe not red starred him because they might have saved the red star for somebody else, but they identified him as a priority UDFA as a guy who could help them. There's a couple things about that. You mentioned the 5.5 sacks. He did that with a pressure rate that was only 5.6%, which is really unusual. But what it means is he's really much more of a finisher in terms of what he's doing. I did not watch tape to see if his sacks were cleanup sacks or not, but that's a high 5.5 sacks is a lot for a 5.6% pressure rate. 5.6% pressure rate really is not much of a pocket compressor. On the interior defensive line, on the edge, you might want 20%, 18%. On the interior, 10% is good. But 5.6 is not particularly good. And I'm hopeful he's a run stuffer. The thing that kept showing up is he's had a lot of tackling issues in his career, a 14.7% missed tackle rate. So that's something that's got to get cleaned up. Much too high for an interior defensive lineman. Interior defensive linemen, generally, they get their hands on the running back. That running back's going down. That's a much bigger they're much bigger than the player they're trying to tackle. So a little bit, I'm optimistic He has the requisite size, certainly, to play the position. Probably needs to clean some things up. I'd say he's a likely practice squad guy and a little bit of an unlikely roster guy.
Yeah, yeah. It reminds me a little bit of what was that Nichols at Sam Houston State last year. You know, a guy who like flashed a little bit in preseason and be a good solid depth guy that you can probably call up on if you need a defensive lineman in a pinch during the regular season.
Yeah, you got to get 3 free upgrades or whatever it is now from the practice squad. I don't know whether it's 2 or 3 this year, but they keep changing the rules on that. But yeah, that'd be good if they needed one like that. All right, let me bring up another guy here. Who do I want to talk about here? Okay, we can talk about one that I think is a probable practice squad guy. Oregon State offensive lineman Brandon Kipper, 6'6", 326, 33 5/8 inch arms. Born in 1998, so he'll be 25 in September. Like I said, they got some older guys. The problem with him is really does not have the functional strength yet. 16 bench reps. Awful measurables, a 5.53 40, 24.5 inch vertical, 8 inch broad jump. He's been a penalty machine in college, 35 penalties in his last 1,500 snaps. That is an absurdly high rate. And that included 6 declined. And normally you'd think, oh, decline penalties aren't that bad. Decline penalties mean the defense had an option. They count fully, and oftentimes they're much worse because a false start penalty, at least you're ripping the Band-Aid off. It's always a 5-yard penalty. An illegal downfield penalty, for example, is a 5-yard penalty, but it's also or the result of the play if worse. And if that's third down, the ball was incomplete anyway, you just turned the ball over there and you gave your team no chance for the upside on the play. So decline penalties are actually in a lot of ways worse than the non-decline penalties. What else do I have to say about that? His pass blocking has improved significantly. And in particular, what I noticed was in the second half of his redshirt senior year at Oregon, he only allowed 3 pressures and 1 quarterback hit in his final 7 college games. So that's a nice thing to see. You obviously seeing a lot of green on PFF towards the end of the season, which is nice, but that actual count numbers is quite good. And his overall pass blocking record, really to that point in his entire college career, kind of spotty. So it's nice to see him get it figured out at that point. Hopefully he gets some good tape going. I think he's probably a Ravens practice squad guy and a big strength and penalty avoidance project for the Ravens, but maybe the one they're willing to undertake. I think he's probably a year away from playing for the Ravens, but we'll see how the season progresses.
Yeah, he's a guy I looked at. Especially when it comes to UDFA guys, like Ravens will have like a nice mix of small school, and if there are any like big school guys that kind of fall through the cracks and go undrafted, they'll want those guys too. Guys with a lot of starts under the belt, guys who prove to be durable in college. You know, those are the guys that they're going to want to come in and take a flyer on and at least try to develop because they know they may not necessarily be on other teams' radar. Of like if the other teams let them sign elsewhere, this would be a guy that could kind of slip underneath the radar and develop for a couple of years. Maybe you can turn into something.
Mm-hmm. Who's your next guy?
Okay, my next guy was that the one of the 2 cornerbacks, the one from UTSA. He's the one that the Texas El Paso, right? Yeah,
Corey Mayfield.
Corey Mayfield. Like I thought of the 2 corners that they signed, him and the guy from Vanderbilt. I like Corey Mayfield's tape a lot more. You know, he made more plays on the ball. They said little bit shorter, but I'd sacrifice a little bit in the height if the guy has if his tape looks better. You know, if he has like what he lacks in measurables, he makes up for in instincts, ball skills. He's coming off his best season in his last year where he put up career high numbers, 63 tackles, six for loss, 3 interceptions. It's a guy that gets his hands on the ball. The guy from Vanderbilt only had 2 interceptions to his name in his this other guy already had 3 interceptions and 13 pass breakups this last year alone. So a guy who's around the ball, gets his hands on the ball, makes breaks on the ball, I'll value that more than a guy who just is tall. And I know you like your aircraft carriers, but I like my ball breakups.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it that Corey Mayfield to me is the better prospect. He ran 4.49 at his pro day. Always take that with a grain of salt, but that's fast enough. that will get a bye in the NFL at corner. I think a pretty good chance he ends up in the slot at 5'10", 190, kind of shorter arms at 30.875. This is really good. His actual coverage statistics are very good. 9 touchdowns, 7 interceptions in the last 3 seasons. That's a great ratio to have, or very good ratio to have. Let's put it that way. Passer ratings allowed 79.8, 63.0, 89.1, 22 passes defense. You mentioned that. A lot of interception variation. I did actually get to look through his highlights at least, which have several of his interceptions. An overthrow, an undercut on a hitch for a pick six, a tip ball in the middle of the field. I want to see variation in how those interceptions came. I'd like to not always see them under the same circumstances. I like them not all to be easy bad balls that he somehow picked off. These were really nice plays he made on the football each of these times. He has been penalized 19 times total in the last 3 seasons, so it gets a little grabby. He's exclusively an outside cornerback at UTSA, but I think he might be ticketed to slot for the Ravens. I think if I had to guess, he has a pretty good chance to be the Ravens, backup slot corner. They have a lot of cornerbacks to work through this year, but it's going to be interesting to see. I don't think there's any reason why Pepe, a 4th-round draft pick last year, necessarily has the advantage over Corey Mayfield, even though he went undrafted. I think you got to, first of all, you're resetting the clock. You got a little bit bigger player in Mayfield, so it'll be interesting to me to see how they look at those two guys and relate them together. Do you want to talk about the Vanderbilt cornerback while we're here?
Yeah, we can talk about him. Guy that transferred from Connecticut, and it's funny when guys transfer after having their quote unquote best season to date, and then have a lesser season at the new place. And he's one of those guys that had one of those lesser seasons. Like I said, his last year at Connecticut, he did get his hand on the ball a little bit more, didn't make more plays, and then he went to Vanderbilt and had I don't even know what you call it, an average season, a below average season.
That's too generous.
Yeah, that's like below average season. So he's a guy that I feel like they really kind of brought in as like, I don't want to say unmeasurables alone, but like he has prototypical quarterback size and length that you like, and you can see what maybe we can turn this guy into something. Maybe he wasn't coached well at Vanderbilt. And sometimes that's the thing with the transfer portal thing, man. Guys fall in love with these new destinations, but sometimes the grass isn't always greener on the other side. So when you make that commitment to transfer to another place, a new place where you've had success, I mean, it can really be Pandora's box for these young men sometimes.
So a fair amount to talk about here. You mentioned the measurable. He's 6'2", 194. Here's the problem with his measurables. So that part looks good. He looks the part of an aircraft carrier. 470, 40. That is not going to get it done on the outside at corner. It's like the 2nd percentile or something, according to one of the things. And that's a pro day measurement. So if they were fudging, they're fudging in the wrong direction on that, Yeah. He's born 5/12/2000, so he's a 23-year-old guy. He had an unbelievable turnaround in terms of getting his tackling together in his senior year. And this might be what the Ravens like, that he really put his nose to the grindstone, obviously changed his game, probably changed his tackling form, although I don't know exactly what contributed to the career missed tackle rate of 24.4% in his first years. In his senior year, 4.2%. So he missed only 2 tackles, made 46. And that's 4.2% missed tackle rate and 24.4% before that. Just unbelievable. And I think the Ravens may have looked at that. They may have combined it with interviews and said, we like the guy's coachability. We like his interview. Maybe we don't know about that 40 time. Maybe he reported an injury to them and said, I run faster than that. They have Hamilton from last year as a guy who ran 470, who they know plays a lot faster than 470. They may like him as maybe a zone corner. They may like him as a press corner.
I was going to say I've even seen some things that said he may project better as a safety at the next level, given his lack of speed, but he has good closing speed. Because like a lot of times where we can read things, thought they were coming, he closed real fast. He's one of those guys that can maybe read things, diagnose things a little quicker, and react quicker. So like sometimes you'll have the guys who are fast, but like they don't read things well, and so they're a tick slower than the guys who may recognize. You can have a 4-4 guy and a 4-7 guy, but if the 4-7 guy knows what he's doing all the time, and the 4-4 guy's kind of lost in space, then one guy's going to be in position to make plays, and the other one is just going to be trailing. Like, yeah, he has good recovery speed, but if you don't get beat, you'll have to recover.
Right. Instincts play so much of a part at safety, and you're right about that. And I have that on my thing. Is not sure what the Ravens are hoping for here. Perhaps conversion to safety. And you probably read it somewhere, but his in coverage last year, this is just unbelievable. Opposing passer rating of 139.4. So it's a good thing he was a good tackler. 9.8 yards per target. There's only a handful of Ravens receivers in their entire history who have reached 9.8 yards per target for a season. Everybody who threw at, Jeremy Lucien was 9.8 yards per target on average. So that's a really scary number. And I think you're probably right about the conversion to safety is the likely route they're going.
Yeah.
You want to pick the next guy?
Yeah, sure. I got the defensive end from the HBCU that I liked. What was his name? I got it up here.
Cameron Peterson.
Yeah, there we go. Yeah, from Southern University. Mm-hmm. Yes, he's a guy that given that the Ravens have a whole. I wouldn't say this is a whole F5 technique, but with the release of Calais Campbell, the cap space, there's a bit of a void there, and you don't want to go into it with just Brent Urban. I know they talked about having Tavius Robinson play a little bit of that too, but he's a guy that you're also going to want to line up on the edge. So you're gonna need some more depth at 5 technique. And if they're going to spend their, if they're going to allocate their big money, remaining cap dollars to getting a veteran corner, then maybe you try to, plug that hole at 5 technique with a mixture of, Tavius Robinson, Brent Urban, and maybe even this guy from Southern here. He's a guy that's, another guy who's kind of an ascending player who's coming off, his best season of his collegiate career. HBCU guy, 6'5", 280 pounds. He has pretty pretty decent size to play 5 technique. I feel like if he puts on a little bit more weight, it'd be better. Help him hold up better at the NFL level. But he was a pretty good run stopper. I watched him at the HBCU Legacy Bowl. He's a guy that was pretty good as a run stopper and penetrator in the backfield. So I think he's one of those upside guys that can, if he shows a little something in the preseason, he could find himself a little niche role on this team.
Yeah, I think that's possible, or be a guy that is on the practice squad and maybe is a guy you call up when the nag occur as they do throughout a typical NFL season. Same thing. I agree with you on the 5 tech is his spot. He had a 10.6% pressure rate in 2022. That's good. That's what you want on the interior defensive line. If I recall correctly, he has about 6 batted passes in his college career. I may be thinking of the wrong guy, but I think it's him. Good run defender. He spent time at McNeese State before Southern. What it looks like to me is he probably is a good space denier. Gets in the backfield a little bit with penetrating and denies space well, but he has not had a good missed tackle rate for his career, 16.2%. So I think he's a reasonable chance to make the practice squad. I think there's a good chance he does not get poached from the Ravens, and you need a 5 tech on about 20% of plays. So it's not the position where you need a lot of extra guys. And just put that in perspective. You're going to play about 65 defensive snaps per game. 20% of that is 13. If you're asking Brent Urban to play 13 snaps, he'll get you through that. He's a fine player. And if you ask somebody else like Broderick Washington to take a share of that, no problem with that either. I do think the Ravens are particularly prone on the defensive line right now to injury with the guys they have. One of the things that will help get away from that, let me just lay this out there right now, is that Michael Pierce is healthy for the year, and Travis Jones and Michael Pierce could be on the field at the same time a lot, because I think Travis Jones really could provide some very good penetration value when he's allowed to go one-on-one against a guard from that 3 tech spot, as opposed to what it gives you as a plain kind of backup nose. So hopefully he won't be put in the position where that's the only position he really plays, and get some quality other reps, because he's still probably going to be a 2-down player, that might change if we really see some great pass rush out of him. But I'm eager to see a broader set of responsibilities along that defensive line on early downs from Travis Jones.
Yeah. I don't want to get too off the topic here, but a guy like Travis Jones, somebody I'm really excited about heading into year 2.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just like what he flashed in the preseason last year. I mean, that was a guy who, like, if it wasn't for that damn knee sprain, I mean, this is the dude that I felt like, like after Michael Pierce went down, I was like, okay, like this is our guy. He's the kind of guy that has the quickness and strength. I mean, just like that natural grown man juggernaut strength to really blow through dudes, and violent active hands. The kind of guy who can, he's not just your traditional nose. He's a guy you can slide over the 3 technique and play other spots on your defensive line because he has that quickness, he has that power. He can pretty much bully any interior offensive lineman he comes across.
Yeah, it's, when Brett Irwin was on the show the one time, one comment he made about Travis Jones was really telling, and we were talking about like stunting and then trying to go into the shoulder of a center after crossing a guard, for example, and he would know that he would have the length advantage most typically then, and the thing that he said is he always has to go from 2 hands down to 1 to do that, and if you could, you'd probably go from one hand right away because you're longer with 1 arm than you are with 2, and so you would have a further advantage where you can't do anything about the fact that you have a big arm, big old paw on his shoulder because he can't reach you. But Urban said, "No, I really can't do that. I have to go 2 hands and then 1." The only guy I've seen that do that is Travis Jones. And
yeah, so, this is that episode. It was a good one.
Yeah, I really love that comment. It gave me so much hope for Travis's future in terms of what's going on here. So that'll be a lot of fun. Let's see. I think we talked Peterson. We agree he's a reasonable practice squad guy. We talked about Deshaun Manning already, right? Or did we not?
We talked on a pre-show. Okay,
so let's talk about Deshaun Manning, offensive lineman out of Kentucky after 4 years at Auburn, 6'3", 327, 34.5-inch arms, 534. This is not an exceptional athlete. Okay, he just is not that at all. 1,878, though, SEC snaps. Iron has sharpened iron to a degree. He's been a consistently fine pass blocker. One of the things that's mentioned about it in multiple scouting reports is that he handles the bull rush very well. And so if that's all the defensive tackle has, that's really good. Very limited mobility, not great lateral mobility, not great movement to level 2, but I think he's a high probability practice squad player. And guys like that who have his kind of size and his kind of length almost always find a way at least onto a practice squad. And in fact, they're the kind of guys who get poached from a practice squad. So if the Ravens have this guy, they may be forced into a decision to keep him on the roster or not. And they'll look at him preseason. He either show up or he really won't. And if he puts a bunch of crappy tape on there, they may still keep him on the practice squad just because of his measurables, try and work it out with him. And then obviously there's not as much of a chance that he'll get poached if other teams are looking at that. But Deshaun Manning, a guy I think probably has a high probability of being on the practice squad.
Yeah, when it comes to the Ravens, especially when it comes to offensive linemen, whether undrafted or drafted, they really value two things. Power 5 pedigree and size. And if you come from a smaller school, you better be big. You better be either really big or really efficient in your technique. But when you come from a Power 5 school and you're big, like I said, those are 2 things that Ravens are like, we'll give this guy a shot. And like our guy Daniel Reese even mentioned that given that they signed him to a 40,000 guaranteed, it's on the higher side as far as UDFA money. So he's a guy that they clearly prioritize in undrafted free agency.
Yeah, do you have the numbers for everybody for that? I mean, 40,000 is, I think there's only 150,000 in the total pool, or at least that was what it was last year.
No, I don't have them for everybody.
For
I just saw that. Okay. I just saw that Daniel had pointed that out when Aaron Wilson had tweeted out the money for it. Usually they don't mention the guy's money unless the guy got a sizable amount of money.
Right.
So I know a guy I'll be going to be talking to for a work story, Brandon Peely from up here in Anchorage, Alaska. He signed with the Dolphins. He signed to 100,000. That's what they signed into. So That's big free agent. That's big free agent money, and you can tell that's a guy that's probably going to factor into their plans and what they really think is going to make their roster. I know it's not Ravens related, but it just kind of ties into this topic as far as you kind of go when the money goes. Okay, they clearly like that guy. 'Cause I think that with the Patriots signed Malik Cunningham from Louisville, the quarterback who broke a bunch of Lamar Jackson's records to a sizable undrafted free agent deal. So he's probably going to be contention for the third spot behind Zappe and Mac Jones up there.
All right, do you want to bring up the next guy?
Yeah, let me go to my list here. No, I think another small school guy, big old dude. Where is he at? Okay. Takeem Dawson, Southern Mississippi. Oh, that guy. I mean, talk about like what did I just say, Ken? When you come from a small school, you got to be either big or technically sound. Now, he's not necessarily technically sound, but that dude is big and he's agile. I mean, for somebody that big, 6'5", 365 pounds, to be able to get out and move in space the way he does, and he can play both tackle. He has experience playing both tackle and guard. I mean, that's just I'm playing the violin right now. That's music to the Ravens' ears. He's a guy that they're definitely going to want to try to develop and bring along.
So there's a lot to like here, and you mentioned some of it here, but 6'5", 378, 35-inch arms. Okay, and this is a really great point on the efficient frontier of length and strength. 35-inch arms and 28 bench reps. That's really good. I mean, there aren't that many guys who get to 28 bench reps, and guys with 35-inch arms, very, very, very unusual for that to happen. But then he's got some of the downside. He's got a 5.54 40. That's like Rich Eisen level, slightly better. Literally, I mean, he's an okay run blocker who in college has been absolutely awful as a pass blocker. So I'm trying to figure out what the Ravens really see, because he played offensive tackle at Southern Miss. I'm thinking the Ravens may move him to guard. And right now, the Ravens, I understand why that size, length, and strength would be intriguing. He's a complete body sculpting project. I mean, the guy he's not carrying around a tire. He's carrying around like a Wendy's around his belly. So he's huge, man. And I don't want to be too rough on him for that, but it is what it is. The Ravens may think he'd be better suited at guard. What you really see is they're piling up right tackle and tackle to guard conversions, but the Ravens do not have a good handle on who the next left tackle is. If Ronnie Stanley suddenly can't go, I mean, everybody they've got is pretty much a right tackle, or it has to be kicked into guard. And it's basically like building your pitching staff and acquiring 20 relievers and saying, we can get through with this. So you have no real starting pitchers, and it's just not an ideal situation. And that's the Ravens obviously see something like they like, and I hope it's not just those measurables. I hope it's something about what he sounded like when they talked to him, or something about a coach said about his work ethic, or maybe something that Joe D saw on tape, or the scouts did and conferred with Joe D, and they said, yeah, we can work with that kind of thing to train him. But he's a major project. He'd be a full year away. I don't think he gets poached off the Ravens practice squad if he's sitting there. So I think he's an interesting one, but a likely practice squad guy at the best.
I'll tell you what, if he was in the preseason, if this guy's laying out dudes like he was in some of his highlight tapes, there's gonna be a good chance he get poached, just because somebody might be willing to take a chance on that upside on that big guy right there. Excuse me. But he's a guy what kind of stuck out to me about the Salah pick was that they talked about the Zoom call he had with Joe D. And I figured Joe D might have quite a few Zoom calls with guys who were, like I said, had desirable measurables. That he's like, hey, if you're willing to work and take this coaching, I can really, I can really make you something here. Yeah. I feel like that's a guy that, whenever I look at some of these size and measurable guys, I'm like, yeah, that's a Joe D guy right there. That's a guy Joe D was. I wouldn't necessarily pounding the table for, but like, hey, you give me this guy in this room, I can do something with him.
This is an interesting point, because one of the things I did a lot at work was be involved in the hiring process. And hiring actuaries, everybody's kind of smart. So you're working through people, and everybody's on their best behavior when they come in. So you don't really get a sense necessarily of can they do the work. So we had to give them a test that you kind of put them under stress. And I hope the Ravens we called it the first day intern test, but it was a way to basically see how they thought by having to interpret an income statement. Won't get into it any more depth than that, other than to say people could not only could they not be able to process, and you'd find that out from this test, but you'd also find out when they had a shitty attitude. They basically they didn't want to take the test. They said, I only had one cup of coffee. You're asking me to take this test, kind of thing. It's like, yeah. So what I hope the Ravens have that's like this, and why I brought this up, is I hope they have their set of questions that really helps them identify who are the people who want to work. Their interview process. I hope it gets at that. And if Jody just asks a guy, hey, I can teach you how to play with your body. I can teach you how to use your God-given gifts and improve your body, but you got to be committed to figuring out the weight room and to doing all those things. And every other guy on the other end of the phone or the Zoom call in this case is going to say, yeah, coach, I'm all in on that. I am completely committed to that. And if he's lucky, he doesn't reach up with the wrapped cheeseburger in the other hand in his case to finish it off while he's on the call. But seriously, I mean, the Ravens have got to have a set of questions they ask that really dig at coachability and maybe deal with personal experiences or whatever it might be. I'd really be interested to know what those are. Bisciotti coming from a hiring background, a personnel background with the companies he's built, I bet he has a lot of great ideas on this, or his top people would have come in and brought some of that to the Ravens. And I'm pretty sure it's likely they have this kind of thing, but I'd really love to know it in terms of coachability, how they identify it with questions.
I can tell you for a fact one thing, or at least two-pronged question that I know that they ask. They ask a guy, what do you think you need to work on? And what are your weaknesses? Because they already know your strength. If they didn't know your strength, you wouldn't be sitting in that room or on that Zoom call. But they want you to be transparent. So they're going to ask you, where do you feel like you need to work on? And what areas are they like? What they want to hear is not, I could get better at this, I could get better at that. They want to hear the guy that's going to say everything. You work on everything. Or a guy who's gonna, be up front about his weaknesses, or I really struggled with my pass sets, my vertical sets, this past year, but it's something I've been working on with the foot doctor, with balance bands or whatever. And if a guy gets into the intricate ways in which he's telling you how he intends and how he's been trying to improve, you can see that improvement, from year to year, especially with some of these advanced metrics. And nowadays, that's what you want to hear. That's what coaches want to hear. I've spoken to many coaches about, what do you look for? When I was covering colleges, what do you look for in a recruit or a future prospect? They said they want people who want to learn, who want to be coached, not people who come in thinking that they're the hot shit already because you wanted them, because you recruited them, but the ones that want to be there and want to be coached hard.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's asking them that. You hopefully get a very honest answer on that, and not one that they're intentionally intending to gloss over. Now, one of the problems with players is they're going to be extremely well coached by their agents before the interview to say, look, if they ask you about weaknesses, you find 3 that you really want to talk about in terms of how to improve your game, kind of thing, and you have 2 of them where you've already got actionable things that you're doing on. So I wouldn't even trust that coaching. I'd rather ask him a question about movies or something to try and figure out if that somehow relates to coachability, and the player, can be caught off guard because the question is not directly about football, kind of thing. So I'd like to, I'd like to see that. I'd like to, have another question about world events. If you really try to figure out about processing and information, how they're taking it in, it's give me something different. To get at that.
It's funny you say that, so because for my full-time job of covering sports up here in Anchorage, so for every year we go about covering certain sports in non-traditional ways, to kind of get in the head of some of the athletes. We'll have a series of questions for them, right? And one of them, I'll ask, what got you into the sport, and what do you feel like your best event, and then I'll throw a curveball. What kind of Netflix series do you like to binge watch? Or are you a hype music guy? What's your favorite kind of genre of music? And not only does that relax the person, but it kind of gives you what is your favorite non-sports leisure activity to do? If an athlete tells me that their favorite thing to do is play video games or to sleep, okay, you're not really dedicated to your craft like that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't be allowed to do those things.
It's a good question.
But if you tell me, I said what kind of non-sports leisure activities you like to do, and you say I like to train, or like I like to run for fun, or you have to do some kind of physical activity. Okay, this is someone who's dedicated to their craft. Like you'll come across those kids who have who do the year-round coaching, who don't just train during the season, but they have their own personal coaches that they get with in the off season to keep refining those skills. So those are the things I feel like coaches at every level look for, especially at the professional level.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good. You'd have to listen to how they explain their thing. Maybe you learn something about their time budgeting from asking him a question like that. But that'd be a good one. I don't know who's supposed to be next. I think you brought up Tykeem Das, right? So do you want me to go to my next guy here? Let's see. We have gone through a lot of these now. Okay, there's one. Let's go to Maryland wide receiver Dante Demas.
That was going to be the next guy on my list right there. Go ahead.
So we know him pretty well here in Maryland. 6'3", 212, 457, 40. Had an unbelievably bad year in 2022. Now, he was recovering from an ACL that he suffered in 21, but he was really bad in 22. 5.5 yards per target, a 66.9 passer rating throwing to him. The thing you have to look at is say, who is this guy? And if you look back to 2021, he had 14.1 yards per target. That's like, I think JSN might have been close to that number in 21 also. And he basically only had 8 targets this last year, and he's drafted, almost the top wide receiver in the entire class. So you could look at those two and say, hey, if we're just going by results, then Dante Demas is not too different from JSN in terms of what happened to him from year to year. 7.0 yak per reception, natural X receiver. A lot of things to like about that. It's just this. I don't know how to figure out what kind of an injury red flag he still has after not coming back from the injury. One of the big differences is JSN apparently a lot of soft tissue injuries that he was not able to play through, and took some heat for, by the way, from Todd McShay in particular, but had trouble getting on the field for that. But Demas, he has some really nice things. He has some wiggle at the top of the route that is not great, I'd say. He does not decelerate particularly well, and that was looking at 22 tape in terms of a guy who sits in the chair and really knows how to do it. But I've got to bet that given the differences in yards per target, he had better wiggle and better deceleration in past years. Still has good effort at the catch point despite the mediocre results. And I think he's a good practice squad chance. I don't think he'll make the roster as a receiver. Not that the room is too crowded, but I don't think he will make the roster. Where are you?
Yeah, he's a guy that I didn't want to talk about. I didn't even mention him in the article I wrote about the UDFA just because I just don't really see a path for him onto the roster. But he's a guy that I know Ravens fans and Maryland fans in particular are gonna want to hear about. And he's a guy he kind of reminds me a little bit of Shamar Bridges based off his tape from last year. Big contested catch guy. Doesn't break, like I said. I really feel like I kind of give him like somewhat of a pass because as we all saw with JK and with Gus, that first year coming back from ACL, especially when you're in a skill position, you're just not going to be the same. You're still like a year away from being yourself. It really takes players like a year and a half, sometimes even 2 years, depending on the degree of the damage to that knee. Especially when you're playing a position that relies on sudden and sharp movements, you're still going to have that little bit of tightness, that scar tissue, that kind of drop leg sometimes, depending on what exactly happened to one of your little extremities. So he's the kind of guy. I give him a little bit of a pass for 2022. I know everybody's kind of focusing on that highlight catch he had over Joey Porter. But so he's a guy that can show that he can stretch the field in his career, and if he makes some nice highlight plays, highlight catches in the preseason, he'll definitely become a fan favorite real quick. But still, I don't see a path for him onto the roster unless this guy just goes balls to the wall, special teams.
Yeah, the camp darling route has not really been a successful one. The Ravens have, in a large way, but barring injury, they have the guys they think are going to make the team, and they almost always do. And just a few slots are really up for grabs in training camp. But, he is – I can't tell you who that guy is right now. And if he comes to camp and he looks more like the 14 yards per target guy, than the 5.5 yards per target guy, then it'll be one of the really interesting stories of camp. And I think that's part of the fun of having him on the team.
Yeah, by that time we'll be more than a year and a half removed. So we'll see when we get there.
All right, I got one or two more left here. The next one is the Colorado School of Mines guy, Trey Botts, 6'2", 284 defensive lineman. 30 bench reps is his call-out card. So shorter arms, but 30 bench reps is good no matter what your arm length is. That's exceptional. He was the RMAC Defensive Player of the Year, and I do not know what the RMAC is. But that's where the Colorado School of Mines plays in a Division II program. 64 tackles, 16 tackles for loss, 5.5 sacks. Obviously, the Ravens have something they like here. A lot of these guys, by the way, you can't necessarily find college tape on them, but you can find high school tape on them. And I forget if that was the case with Botts or not, but there are several guys who fall into that category. And given their need on the defensive line, it seems like he might be a guy, probably needs to grow a little bit, take on some more weight. But if you can get up to carry about 20 more pounds, he makes sense at a 3 tech. Otherwise, he's a little light in the loafers. Otherwise, for that, maybe 300 on the nose. Maybe he only really needs to gain about 15 pounds. But he's kind of undersized, frankly, for a 3 tech right now.
Yeah, I mean, who's another guy from Colorado State playbook that we know that took a little bit of time to develop, and now is playing gangbusters. And a guy like Ryan Jensen came from the same school, same program, different positions, albeit on other sides of the ball. But I am actually familiar with the Colorado School of the Mines, though. Just covering sports up here, they have some pretty good track and field runners there. But as far as his prospect himself, like I said, I didn't put too much stock on the elite. I don't say elite, but the guys who run from known for more run stuffing than pass rushing. Like I said, whenever you're that strong, you can show you can push the pocket. Just because sacks aren't everything, So I wasn't able to find any pressure numbers on him. But he's a guy that if you can show they can push the pocket in the preseason, and maybe you can stick around, especially if you have a penchant for stuff in the run, because the Ravens are one of the teams that still value that in the defensive lineman. They're always going to be a stop the run first kind of team.
Do you value a guy maybe who clearly has a workout ethic like Trey does to be around some of the other rookies and make them work to get stronger? Is that a North Star work ethic you want at camp, even if maybe you think this guy is not going to work out? And he was some conferences Defensive Player of the Year. That means something. So he probably does have a chance to work out. I just wonder if there's a value in having that, and you've got other players out there like Tykeem Doss, who Tykeem Doss, at least, is he's a little bit related. He's a little bit in touch with his strength, so he's done some work there. But they have other guys like the lineman they drafted in the 6th round, who's just not strong enough right now that would benefit from having a Trey Botts around.
Yeah, iron sharpens iron, man. And when you get in the weight room, testosterone gets to flowing, and you see some other guy throwing up weight, and you're gonna want to try to you throw up the same amount of weight or try to keep up, and that's the kind of thing that, especially for those lower round and undrafted guys, you're gonna have to do something to separate yourself. And if you got this undrafted dude because coaches, I'll tell you one thing right now, coaches will always highlight the dudes who are working their ass off on and off the field, and they're like, hey, this kid, hey, great, like I can hear Harbaugh now, great thing by Botts, man. Where Botts was in there throwing around the weight, he was getting in there on special teams, and he was good. Like good about Botts. Work is down today, Botts. Like I can hear it now. I can hear it now. So he's the kind of guy that if he's one of those high effort, high motor guys, and especially one of those guys who are dedicated in the weight room and as well as on the field. We'll have a chance to stick around for the Ravens, at least on a developmental basis.
Your turn.
Okay. I didn't do too much on a tight end just because the Ravens are set at tight end. Then the quarterback. The only thing I really saw by him was he's not gonna. he's not going to challenge Tyler Huntley for that backup quarterback job. Now, if they would have brought in a guy like a Malik Cunningham, then my ears would have perked up a little bit. I would have been like, okay, here's a guy that could potentially be the next Tyler Huntley. But the Delaware guy, I don't see him threatening Huntley. I don't see either of these tight ends that they brought in. I just kind of envision them more as camp bodies, even though I think the other guy was a little more productive. I think one of the guys put up some decent numbers in this last year at in college as a receiver.
Yeah, one of them is really a blocking tight end. Let's talk about I'll talk about those three guys if you don't have other things to say about them. But Nolan Henderson is a shorter guy at 5'11", 202, 453, 40. So he's pretty quick for a quarterback. Extends plays very well. 3+ seconds time to throw in each of his years of college, that is incredible that you can maintain that kind of thing. And he's been as high as, I believe, 3.2. And even while taking that long to throw, I think it was 3.02 in his final year, he still only had a 4.9% sack rate. So that's really good. We could do that. 50 touchdowns, 13 interceptions in his career. Broke several of Joe Flacco's records at the University of Delaware. And I think he competes with Anthony Brown for the practice squad role is how I would look at him. So, I don't think he takes Tyler Huntley's job until 24. And then who knows if he's around or not. But Henderson was kind of an interesting prospect to me. I don't know that he's quite good enough to hang, but he might. And they always keep a third guy on the practice squad for exactly such purposes. The two tight ends, Brian Walker of Shepherd. Good luck finding tape on him. The Ravens put out about a minute or something. There's an interview out there with him that's extensive. They're talking to him. He's got a LinkedIn profile saying he's a student athlete, and this seems to be, kind of looking for a job maybe, but maybe just a summer internship. But it'd be nice. It's probably a good idea. He's from Clarksburg, Maryland. He had 63 receptions, 799 yards this last year, and he's first team All PSAC East, and so he's the D2 All American first team. So it certainly has some accreditations that are meaningful. And here's the interesting thing. He played with Tyson Bagent, who is the most prolific touchdown passing quarterback in all of college football history. Has, I believe it's 159 career touchdown passes in total. 148 was the Division II record, and Walker caught number 148, and 157 gave him the all-time any division record. And Walker caught that one also. And so obviously Bagent is not really considered to be a fantastic pro prospect. I imagine he's in somebody's camp.
Yeah, he signed somewhere. I saw it on the NFL Network. He signed somewhere.
Yeah. I
think his dad is the professional. That's the guy whose dad's a professional arm wrestler, right? Bagent. I think he's the guy that they were talking about the Senior Bowl. Whose dad was like a professional arm wrestler.
Huh.
And he was there. He was there watching him at the Senior Bowl.
That's interesting. I did not know that. Shepherd a 487.40. So I don't think honestly he's a great candidate to be a practice squad player. He might make it, but the Nebraska tight end Vokalek, who's 6'6", 259. He's a sixth-year senior. He's about 250 years old. No, he'll be 25 in June. So he's old. Solid pass and run blocker. Really rarely asked to pass block, which is kind of nice because it probably means he has a little bit in terms of receiving skills. But here's the thing I really like. Nebraska plays a lot of unbalanced offensive line, and they trust him to play the tackle side on the light side of an unbalanced line, which often means he's going to have some sort of inline backside blocking responsibility. So that was nice to see. And I think if the Ravens find themselves in need of a blocking tight end, I think he could be the emergency guy. So probably for me, he's the more likely practice squad players. It seems like there's too much overlap with what Brian Walker can give you with what the other tight ends are already on the roster who are flex guys already give you.
Yeah, that's a guy who I just couldn't find a way even for him to be in the practice squad, even though he said he put up good production, and like that I had him kind of jotted down off to the side. But given all the receiving talent they already have with Andrews, I mean it's going to be hard even just to get Likely and Kolar, regular targets in this offense, let alone a UDFA guy. So even if he does ball out, I could see him being if he does ball in the preseason, he could be a guy that's a potential trade candidate. You never know, but like you have to really show out.
Yeah, the Ravens did have a trade of Nick Easton a few years ago, which is a guy they got undrafted. The 49ers had an injury, and they traded a 7th-round pick to the Ravens for it might have been a conditional 7th for Easton. That was kind of nice. A couple guys we haven't talked about, but I don't really have anything to say about them. The center from Connecticut, Jake Guidone or Guidone, I'm not sure how to exactly say it, but just a serviceable guy at UConn, not a special guy. Nothing really to say about him. I think he's upside is probably the practice squad. My guess would be probably he's just a cut. Anything to say about him?
He's going to be a guy that they're going to have around for rookie minicamp and for the fourth quarter preseason games.
All right. Well, that's fairly clear. Owen Wright, who's a bigger back, 5'9", 219. So that's a thick-bodied dude. Runs 4.53. He's only had 638 total college snaps with 239 carries. So he's in there. He's usually getting the football. You think a big guy like that playing at Monmouth, so they're going to have a lot of smaller opponents, would do better in terms of yards after contact, but he's got terrible yards after contact, terrible at missed tackles forced, both of those things, much below a standard. The real big context questions to start with. It's just not a good combination of things. But the one thing that stands out, and it's a little bit of tape on him, was what a good pass blocker he was. Very aggressive, moving forward, hit the guy low, pass blocker. And I don't think defensive linemen want to see him because he's going for their knees or really their thighs. And the guy is fairly well practiced in terms of where to hit people to flip them as a pass blocker.
Yeah, that'll get you a practice squad sniff at the next level.
Yeah. By the way, this guy also had an interesting question he was asked. And so they had one of these, what'd you have for breakfast kind of interviews thing. But who are the 3 people you'd like to have dinner with? And his 3 people were Saquon Barkley. Okay. A fine, understands. You think he's a pop culture sports fan, millennial, whatever you want to call him. Second was Quentin Tarantino. And the third one was Jesus. And then I thought, that's well coached, but he is touching all the bases with that, in terms of appealing to various people in the room. One other guy I thought was on here, and let's see if I'm wrong about that. Nope, he's the last one. So I think we've hit on all the 16 guys that I had on the list. Did you have anybody else on your list that they got late?
So I saw that they had added a couple more people. A fullback from, let me see.
Oh, goody, a fullback.
Yeah, that's like I didn't even bother looking that up, man. I mean, it's just how many. You got Patrick Ricard who's probably going to play. I foresee because people are saying that the Patrick Ricard was going to be in jeopardy this year. I was like, absolutely not. I mean, the Ravens, like they even said when they hired Todd Buck, they still want to keep a lot of those Greg Roman run concepts. And Patrick Ricard, who's a guy who can play that, like that blocking tight end role for you.
Yes.
The guy, he splits half of his time with the running backs and tight ends anyway. He's a guy that can fill multiple roles for you guys. And anybody who thinks of him as just the traditional throwback fullback is, clearly doesn't know ball. So
yeah, and Ricard's as needed. He's done that over the last few years. Then the Ravens are much better off when they have a guy who can block and they can put Ricard in the backfield. But they played extremely heavy the last year, and not out of choice. Probably they would have rather had a full wide receiver room and really used that. But what they had was tight ends, and they played basically the heaviest relative football they've ever played, or any team has ever played, I should say, relative to kind of league averages in terms of the number of wide receivers on the field. But yeah, I agree with you completely that Ricard is rock solid safe in terms of being there as a blocking tight end at the very least.
Yeah, and so the other 2 guys were Texas State fullback / defensive lineman, so maybe the next Patrick Ricard, Levi Bell, and then a Lafayette linebacker, Malik Ham. So the Ravens always going to have that UDFA linebacker. It's got to have one every year.
All right. Well, that'd be interesting to see, and they're the fun guys to write about during the preseason games in particular. When they first start getting live fire, it's usually against each other because they're playing other threes basically on the opposing team. And the Ravens have a great record of allocating their personnel well in the second half and dominating defensively in the preseason. I think they kind of jealously guard their meaningless win streak at this point. I frankly, I love it. I love the fact that these guys are playing hard. So it's more fun to watch and write about winning football after the fact. So whether it's meaningless to them, I really enjoy it.
And you know who is not meaningless to, Ken? It's not meaningless to those young players who,
Sure.
who get that confidence going into the guys who make the roster on the final week of the preseason. The guys who might be thrown into the fire because of an early season injury, but they come into the season with that confidence, already kind of, I wouldn't say on 10, but built up, knowing like, hey, I know I can play in this league. Look at what we just did in the preseason and all those plays I just made.
So the one thing I'll say about that, I agree entirely with it. This is their chance to put film on. It's the moment of their life. In a lot of cases, it's their entire NFL career is this preseason that'll come up. But one of the interesting things is the way the Ravens have allocated talent at safety in particular has been something where they're clearly trying to win the game even in the first half. This last year, they had Tony Jefferson at strong safety and Hamilton at free safety in the first half. And then they went to Geno Stone at free safety in the second half. And let me just say, Geno Stone is a fine NFL player. He started on a lot of teams. When he's out there in the second half of a preseason game, playing the whole half, he is freaking Ed Reed relative to the other players on that field. And it's unfair how much above the other players on the field he is. So, it's the Ravens. They have little things that they're really willing to do in the second half of games. They give offensive linemen some longer trials. You still get some discontinuity there, but they don't really go to their third offensive line scheme as much, and they'll still dial up blitzes and everything to try and wreak havoc when they're protected on the back end the way they were with a player like Stone.
Yeah. And I feel like a strategic thing that the Ravens do in those preseason games is they give their primary backup sometimes a little more longer run, just in case they can flip those guys for late round picks. So if a team is so impressed with a guy like Geno, even I don't want them to trade Geno Stone because I value him so much on as a backup safety. But if a team were desperate enough to hey, we need a starting caliber safety, this is a guy who started 11 games for them last year and is still here balling on this preseason. Hey, I feel like if the Ravens could flip Geno Stone for the most for a truly desperate team, like a fourth or fifth round pick. If they could turn him into that'd be great. I mean, I'd settle for a seventh or eighth condition, not eighth, but sixth or seventh conditional pick. With I don't even think that'd be worth it for Geno Stone.
No, that wouldn't be worth it.
Yes, I'd rather them keep Geno Stone. But if you're looking for a 4 or 5, it might be a little tempting.
And Geno Stone, honestly, is probably the Ravens' backup green dot at this point. That's he was when Clark had it. And he took the green dot for a week when Clark missed a game. So I wouldn't think they would do that. It might be Hamilton now. If Hamilton is going to play every snap and be on the back end, he can do it. If Hamilton is going to play slot corner, then he can't be the green dot. So
Roquan, he's never coming off the field.
No, Roquan's got it. The question is who he certainly will be the first green dot. But once he loses, if Roquan is lost for some reason, who's your backup green dot? And it can only be one of 4 positions effectively on the field. It could be either your safeties or either your inside linebackers. So you could give it to Queen or Simpson. Probably not, I'm thinking. And it probably ends up going to Stone, who's going to be playing strong safety, I would think. So it'd be interesting.
That makes the most sense to me. Yeah, that makes the most sense to me.
All right, my friend. Always a pleasure to do these things with you, and you're very fun to do these with because you're always excited about the information here being delivered, and that's just something I kind of feed off too. So, Josh, tell folks where they can find your writing online.
Yeah, so you can find all the Ravens stuff at Heavy on Ravens. That's the Ravens sub website for Heavy Sports, and that's where all the Ravens content can be found. You can find me on Twitter at JoshReed907. And if you're in the Anchorage area, but if you're in the Alaska area, or fans of fun stories about awesome kids and athletes that are because we do stories both on people in Alaska and abroad. I work for Anchorage Daily News full time.
All right. Outstanding, Josh. Other folks out there, if you'd like to be on a film study short this offseason, hit me up with the DM on Twitter. Lots of opportunities. That one play is available. If you want to be part of looking at 2 individual players, 1 offense, 1 defense, it's something I do this time of year. Actually, probably starting towards the end of May. until the beginning of training camp during that dead zone. We have a lot of those shows going out. And if you have anything else you want to talk about schematically, statistically, whatever it might be, lots of time in the remainder of the offseason to talk about. We've just basically ended with this show the heaviest draft content we've ever done. And now we're rolling on to some other things that really look at the roster and see how the Ravens are going to play this season. Josh, thanks again for joining me for this.
As always, thanks for having me, Ken.
And we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.